Welcome to the final installment of the Big Sky Podcast Network Power Rankings. I'm your host, Brian Marceau, for the first time. Well, not exactly the first time, but the first time on this show. I've got a co-host. I've got a guest. It's Dallas Hammer, who typically is hosting Tubs of the Club, but this is a Big Sky Podcast Network, so you guys are stuck with me. Dallas, how's it going?
It is going fantastic. For anybody that knows me, I'm a diehard Vandal and a diehard Rams fan, which has been fun to watch as they just get plowed through every single Sunday. So I'm still in recovery mode from that, but Idaho made the playoffs. Things are going well.
They are. And this week, we're not going to do power rankings, even though it's the power rankings show. This is going to be season grades and season awards. The awards are done similar to how the podcast rankings were done throughout the year. This is a poll given out to Big Sky beat reporters, guys like Greg Woods, Coulter Nuanez, Jane Adams, or Jane Smith. I always get her name wrong, and that is always why I try to not say it. Her first name is Jaden. She covers Northern Colorado.
Jaden Watson Fisher Adams.
See, that's her problem. She has 15 last names. That's her problem. This is not my fault. But anyway, beat reporters who cover all the Big Sky schools. We also have Big Sky Podcast Network co-hosts and hosts, guys like Dallas Hammer voted, Mike Nugent and Brent Wahlberg from Grizz Fan Pod, both the Ryans from R&R Catcast, Colby Peterson, Dustin Chapman from Weber State Weekly, Kyler Neal from FCS Fans Nation and Eagle Power Hour. He's a little more FCS Fans Nation now, but that is not his fault. We're probably going to get to that throughout today's episode about why that happened relative to on the field stuff. But the grades themselves, that's just me and Dallas. And this is brought to us by Hughes River Expedition. Even though it's Big Sky Podcast Network, you're on Tubs at the Club. If you're on Tubs at the Club, that means it's Hughes River Expedition who's a sponsor. And now, first, we're going to start with grades of the good teams. And, Dallas, we're on an Idaho channel. Let's just start with Idaho. So question, you throw it right to you, man. Grade for Idaho. I think this is one of the brain dead ones, but what do you grade? So I gotta filibuster you already. These grades are not on a curve. There are absolutely going to be F's given out through this show. So now to Dallas.
A first caveat from me, Brian? Are we talking pluses and minuses or just straight letters?
You can do plus minus. It's fine.
Okay, A+ for Idaho. There is no question to me. A+. You and I, obviously from an Idaho podcast, both of us thought 5 wins was more than reasonable, and we would have been quite happy with it. And instead, Idaho going back to the FCS playoffs for the first time since they came back to the Big Sky, largely with the same cast of players they had under Paul Petrino, who couldn't seem to find any way to get wins against any team that wasn't like a Northern Colorado level disaster. So nothing more than an A+ for Jason Eck and the Idaho Vandals in his first year as head coach. A playoff berth is something I think Idaho fans thought was going to come 5 years ago when the drop down happened. It took obviously a lot longer to get there than they wanted it to, but first year of the Jason Eck program making the playoffs, you can't give it anything other than an A.
Dallas, make sure to check out the private chat comments. So if the audio came through for you guys, Dallas is saying some stuff pretty similar to what I would say, which is Idaho easily, first off, Idaho exceeded expectations, which is going to be part of why the season felt as good as it did, both for Idaho fans and also Big Sky fans who've been waiting for 4 years for Idaho to show something. But in addition to exceeding expectations, Idaho objectively hit some pretty big metrics. Finally, first time Idaho beat Montana on the road at a sold-out game, which obviously the win mattered, but now Idaho also being a potential attendance driver at some games, that's a big step forward for Idaho. Idaho looking good in the FBS games. Yeah, that part matters. And Idaho makes the playoffs. And I guess the other thing too, man, this is a monkey off our backs, off Idaho backs, was Idaho honestly looked better on the road this year than the Vandals did at home. And Idaho did not look bad at home this year whatsoever. Just had a couple of rough halves. So I'm not going to go with an A plus. The reason I'm not going with an A plus Dallas is because to me, these grades are not curved. And even though Idaho exceeded expectations, obviously Idaho did not have the best Big Sky season in the entire conference. But this was an easy A. Like, this was amongst podcast contributor voters and beat reporters. One of the awards we had was Best Story of the Year. Idaho won Best Story of the Year in a runaway, because it's not just Idaho fans who've been waiting for Idaho to show up. Montana State fans have wanted Idaho to become relevant. Weber State has wanted Idaho to become relevant. Virtually every fan base has wanted Idaho to become something since coming down to the Big Sky. So this year, this is a celebration for Idaho fans, and also the Big Sky itself. If Idaho continues this, it's pretty quickly schools are not going to be stoked about Idaho being good. This is because of how bad Idaho was for so long. But huge season for Idaho, no question. We're going to go more granular on Idaho's season on the Tubs of Club episode tomorrow, previewing that playoff game. But I guess, Dallas, I'm going to throw this to you for every single playoff team. Let's say Idaho finishes 7-4 this season, which the Vandals did, but they're left outside the playoffs. How does that change your grade?
I take the plus off of it and still give it an A. That to me is Idaho won more games than they lost, which is only the fourth time this millennium that's happened. So still has to be an A. It would be disappointing if you're in the UC Davis spot of just being just right outside the playoff bubble. But for Idaho fans, and especially for those that maybe don't follow Idaho, the overall messaging from the Idaho camp is, wow, everything turned around, and this is what it's like to have good football and fun during the fall. This is weird, but I like it.
Yeah, I'll take that. Other things that moved in the right direction for Idaho, which, in case you're not showing up to the Kibbie Dome as a Montana fan or an Eastern fan, Idaho's attendance moved up throughout the course of the season. Took a couple weeks to get going, but that's a big deal for Idaho, and having another Big Sky team with a fun environment. And look, for the playoffs, look, Idaho's going to travel to Southeast Louisiana. This isn't Idaho earning anything, but Idaho gets a break in placement, because I think it's much better for Idaho to be playing a team like Southeast Louisiana that isn't going to have the offensive line and defensive line to really disrupt Idaho, like Weber State might have, at least on the defensive line side. So Idaho might even be able to push that win total up to 8, win a first round game. Second round matchup Idaho has, they're not playing any of the Big Sky or Missouri Valley teams, which every team in the playoffs is good. But Idaho honestly had as good a break as they could get to maybe even push that win total up to 9. Pretty hard to have a better season for Idaho under Jason Eck. And I guess that's the other thing too, is hiring a new coach is always a crapshoot. We're going to talk about some schools that have hired new coaches where it isn't working out as well as you'd hope. Idaho clearly hit a home run. So yeah, okay, A for Idaho. Moving on, next playoff team. Look, this is probably going to be a pretty easy one for you. Sacramento State, Dallas.
I mean, I know that this might have been their expectation based off of what they've done the previous 2 years, but I can't give them anything other than an A plus either. You won every single game on the schedule. You looked pretty damn good doing it. Yes, you had your occasional hiccups. You kind of let Davis back into that game there at the end of the season. Idaho was a close game at the end. Montana, you probably don't win if Lucas Johnson doesn't get knocked out. But again, at the end of the day, you win an 11-0. Like, there's just not a whole lot of, for the regular season, this is an A plus. Now, when they get to the playoffs, yeah, you're probably hoping for more success than you've seen the last 2 years. But from the regular season, this is the other A plus grade to me.
Yeah, Sacramento State on the Big Sky season averages 40 points a game, gives up 22 points a game. So an average Sac State game in conference play was a blowout. Dallas, you talked about the close games with the better teams in the conference. Well, Sac State's 11-0. They also also have an FBS win. We know the FBS win over Colorado State is not actually as impressive as, I mean, honestly, it's like beating Montana. I mean, we'll talk about Montana because of injuries, but like I find beating Montana, the run of beating Montana, Idaho, and Weber in back-to-back weeks for Sac State significantly more impressive than beating Colorado State 41-10.
I mean, Brian, if you extend that an extra 2 weeks, they also beat Eastern Washington and Northern Colorado. So 5 of the best in the Big Sky just right in a row there.
How did you disrespect Cal Poly? You left them off that 6-game winning streak, but yeah, look, Sac State, what matters for them is going to be the playoffs. But now, look, Troy Taylor has one Big Sky loss in 3 seasons, guys. This is the 3rd consecutive at least share of a Big Sky title Sac State's had in the last 3 normal seasons. Sacramento State makes the 2-quarterback system work because Troy Taylor's creative cell. Sacramento State, look, we'll get to player of the year on the offense, but Sacramento State, it's so damn wild to me that in 2018 this team won 1 game in 2018. That you switch coach. It was even a more dramatic version than Idaho of just get the right guy in place. And look, another home run hire, Troy Taylor. I don't know if Troy Taylor's ever going to leave Sacramento State, but if he stays for like 3 more years and Sacramento State's playing like this, that stadium better be renamed the Troy Taylor Memorial Stadium at some point.
So sneaky, be on the lookout. Dunaway and O'Hara are both seniors. So assuming they have used up all of their COVID eligibility, do we see Sac State with a 2-quarterback system next year? Or
of course not.
Whatever they have in the system turn things around? And if so, again, Brian, I would assume the same thing, that we're not going to see a 4th straight year of 2-quarterback system. I don't think we're going to see that. However, I would think if Troy Taylor ever leaves Sac State, it would be if and when he has a regular single quarterback offense.
Yeah, when we did the research for the coaching search during Idaho's off season last year, I talked to some Sacramento State reporters, and that was when I was checking into leads on Andy Thompson, the defensive coordinator for Sacramento State, and what everyone told me around Sacramento State was like, look, if Troy Taylor gets a kick-ass offer, yeah, he'll leave. But Troy Taylor's a little bit older for his first head coaching job. He actually took about a 50% pay cut to come from being the offensive coordinator at University of Utah to become the head coach of Sacramento State. So being a head coach is something the dude wants. If he doesn't get a real good offer in probably the Northern California area, like Cal or something like that, they just expect Troy Taylor's fine where he is. He has virtually no media obligation. They're beating the shit out of everyone. Look, here's a wild stat. I don't have the number pulled up, but look, Friday, College game days in Bozeman for Brawl the Wild. That was not the best attended Big Sky football game on Saturday. Now, it's because Bozeman, the stadium there only holds 19,000, but the Causeway Classic, the Sacramento State UC Davis game to close the year, that had just under 23,000 people there, Dallas. Sacramento State's starting to get some fans there, so they have an actual environment. Like the whole thing's turning around. It's just a damn success story that everyone in the Big Sky should be happy about. 1, just because it's another good team. But 2, if you're Idaho, which is in the process of turning attendance around, if you're a school like Portland State's not a good one, but like Northern Colorado, if that's a place that can ever turn around. Sacramento State's an example of, yeah, if you suck forever, it does take a little bit of time to get fans there, but Sac State has no history of being a relevant football program. They do not have campus life the way University of Idaho, University of Montana does, because it's a commuter school. They can sell out, or they can come. They essentially sold out the Causeway Classic. They have a larger stadium than Sac State probably wants, and they're averaging pretty good numbers for Sac State. They're just showing when teams win, you really can build a program. Dallas, anything else you want to hit on with Sac State before moving on?
So Sac State is like I'm curious to see when we get to a point where people stop thinking like Sac State is a cool story and people are just ready for Sac State to suck again. That will come if Troy Taylor keeps doing this, and I'm really excited to see when that happens, because right now I still look at Sac State like Portland State. Like, again, as a biased Vandal fan, I knew that the day would always come where Idaho would find its footing in the Big Sky again. Just history was there, the resources are there, the facilities are there. It made sense. If you're a team like Portland State, or one of the 300 people that care about that program, looking at what Sac State is doing right now is what you have to strive for. Like, there is a chance you can hire a coach that, I mean, realistically, probably shouldn't be at Sacramento State. Like you said, Brian, took a pay cut out of a Power 5 school just to come here to be a head coach for the first time. If you're Portland State and you've got all these different challenges and all these issues, you can look at a school like this and say, look, it is possible to win if you're not the Montana State, Weber State, like a little bit better funded, a little bit more supported programs than the Sacramento State and Portland State of the world.
Okay, I now feel the need to filibuster. We got a comment from Ron Loney saying that I'll throw it on the screen right now. Loney says Sac State, when he says they didn't beat the Bobcats. The Bobcat Stadium holds 22,500, and there were more people with standing room only. So you're wrong. Okay, Ron. Let's. I'm going to just say for a moment, because I went to the Bobcats Montana State University's page where you'd be able to look up attendance, and there is not a link posted with a box score and attendance figures. For the sake of argument, Ron, I'm going to say, sure, you're right. The comparison is that Sac State, UC Davis had pretty damn good attendance, similar to Brawl the Wild, which pretty big deal in Sacramento for that to be the case. I mean, again, 2018, the team won one game. There's no tradition whatsoever. Big turnaround. Ron also followed up and said it's all about coaching, which you are right, dude. Dallas, to answer your question, I don't know if I'm ever going to want Sac State to not be good, because I think they're one of those teams that, look, there's no middle ground. Sac State's either going to have things humming, or they are going to bottom out and be a dumpster fire again. And I don't want there to be a lot of shitty Big Sky teams as long as Idaho is in the Big Sky. We can close the book on Sac State. Let's go to a team that I think there's going to be a little bit more debate on, because I think Montana State, we'll get there in a second. I don't think there's much to debate Montana State, but Dallas, Montana. Montana makes the playoffs, just like Sac State, but Sac State got a bye. Montana makes the playoffs. But look, the Grizz season does not go close to how it seemed like it would when Montana was rolling early, based off of playing what us in the Big Sky would call a terrible schedule, but FCS wide, it actually wasn't considered a terrible schedule, because the Big Sky is a good conference. And teams in the Big Sky and Missouri Valley will always have higher strength of schedules because they play themselves. But Montana season, you can pretty easily subdivide this right after Idaho, like heading into the Idaho game, things turned upside down for Montana. They head into Idaho 5-0 with mostly blowout wins, maybe some warning signs from Idaho State. Then lost to Idaho, lost to Sac State, lost to Weber. They beat the shit out of Cal Poly and Eastern. Then a 55-21 embarrassment in Bozeman. But the Grizz get in probably as the last team in the playoffs. How do you grade that? And hey, how do you grade it if they don't make the playoffs? So both.
So I'm going to give this a C- just because they make the playoffs. If they did not make the playoffs with this is an F. And that might sound extreme, but this is Montana. Check the fan base. Half the fan base wants Bobby Houck to go, even harder than they wanted Bob Stitt to go just a couple of years ago. Things are not great over there in Missoula. Now, obviously, they're going to go probably pummel Southeast Missouri State because they got a home game, because they've got more money than anybody else does at this level. Outside of that, this was not a season to be happy about, and I completely understand it. Again, from an Idaho standpoint, looking at a 7-4 as one of your really down years, I would be ecstatic with that. But when you look at how they played, I mean, again, the Idaho State score is closer than the game actually was. It was just a little bit of magic at the end there for Idaho State. But again, you let the worst team in the conference lose only by 8 points. You lose to Idaho, you lose to Sac State, you lose to Weber State, and all of a sudden your season's in jeopardy. You rebound with unfortunately terrible Cal Poly and unfortunately terrible Eastern Washington. I know they're not really, but just for the sake of looking at this schedule, then you get to Montana State and you get absolutely boat raced by your big rival in a game that was I mean, it was 55-21 in the final, but that game was over 5 minutes in. That game was a tire fire. If you're Montana, you're happy that you at least made the playoffs, I guess, even though there's a bunch of people that aren't thrilled with that. You should make it to the second round. But that's really all you've got. You got outcoached in multiple games. The overwhelming majority of talent wasn't there like it seemed to be. It felt like this is maybe not the crack in the armor as Montana starts to slip a little bit, but it is fair to raise the question, like, is this iteration of the Montana program going to get to where Montana fans expect them to be?
I can't skip over the Montana State game. There's a ton of content covering Montana State, but the stat I just got to hit on is heading into the Montana State game. The Grizzlies were the best rushing defense in the Big Sky, both in yards per rush. That gave up 2.9 yards per rush at the time, and we're giving up right around 100 yards per game on the season. Well, yeah, that didn't survive the Montana State game, where Montana State, Jesus Christ, man, Montana State didn't even throw a pass until well into the second quarter. They rushed 65 times for only 439 yards and only 5 touchdowns, which shifted Montana from the number 1 rushing defense per game to this is fucking wild, number 5. In 1 week in conference, Dallas, they shifted from number 1 to number 5. In yards per rush, Montana's tied for, they're the second, just barely at 3.6 yards per rush, but they're giving up 2.9. So huge turnover. I'm going to go, this to me is easily the hardest one to grade because, and I'm going to go, it's controversial, man, B-. I say B- because to me, I'm not grading on a curve. Montana did make the playoffs. Now, Montana doesn't make the playoffs this season is you probably call us an F, or at best a D. I'm going to go B- because one, there's some reasonable asterisks. If Lucas Johnson does not go down, Montana against Sac State, Montana probably beats Sac State and Weber State. Those are both single score games with the shittiest backup in the. Don't mean to put Chris Brown down. It's more, I'm putting Bobby Hauck down for playing Chris Brown. The maybe worst backup in the Big Sky was the starter. Clearly, Bobby Hauck should have gone to Danny Britt. But I guess that's the hang up here is Montana's not a bad team. They honestly have feeling. They remind me of Eastern last year from 2019 when Eastern barely missed the playoffs. And what Eastern did is they just killed the teams that were lower because there's talent there was talent on Eastern then, there's talent on Montana now. That if you're not a good team, you're not going to compete. It's going to be ugly. But once Montana's playing better teams, it levels out pretty damn fast. And honestly, it levels out faster than it should because, look, Bobby Hauck, he needs a new OC. He definitely needs a new OC. He needs to completely turn that over to someone who is not him and someone who has not coached with him previously. Also, look, there's just some ways that Bobby Hauck is being stubborn and being rigid with routine is part of why he's good. But that is hitting diminishing returns right now. Montana fan base is pretty touchy about how Bobby Hauck has been at Montana since 2018, and that the University of Montana still has a shit offensive line. How is that possible? Bobby Hauck has been there since 2018, and honestly, Bobby Hauck's teams with Bob Stitt's players offensively were radically superior to Bobby Hauck's teams with his players there. Now, defensively, Montana's better, but the shift between the defense getting stronger and the offense getting weaker, they're not that much different than what Bob Stitt had. It's really not that. It's not that different right now. With again the asterisk of, if Montana wins those 2 games, we're not talking about a D. I mean, I say B- because Montana made the playoffs, and if you made the playoffs, you had a good season, even if you didn't quite hit expectations. But Montana, look, I think Montana needs a win this first round too, because I think Montana still has something to salvage heading into next year. I think it might be on it, or maybe it's best for Montana to lose and Bobby Hauck to get a wake up call. I don't know if he's able to get a wake up call. Because Bobby Hauck is not a bad coach at all. No, any school that has Bobby Hauck, that team in the FCS is going to be at least solid. But they're hitting real diminishing returns. And Houck has not been able to develop a quarterback at all since he's been there. It's he had a transfer in Dalton Sneed for 2 years, then a transfer in Cam Humphrey for a year, then a transfer in Lucas Johnson for a year. The backups don't look ready to contribute. I mean, just look at Idaho now as comparison. Idaho's got 2 freshmen right now who look like they could be good players. Eck's been there for a year. One's a Petrino guy, one's an Eck guy who's in there, but that's Eck in 1 year. Look at what Troy Taylor did at Sacramento State. First got Kevin Thompson. He was gifted that, then developed the Asher O'Hara, Jake Dunaway system for the two to complement each other. There are guys who are developing quarterbacks in this league. Bobby Houck has just serially been unable to do that. So anything else you want to add to Montana, Dallas?
No, other than I would tell them shots fired just from the Idaho fan base, because I mean, going into the fall, Giovanni McCoy, who is now a Jerry Rice Award finalist, was the 4th or 5th quarterback on Idaho's depth chart. And in the stretch from start of spring ball to the end of fall ball, Eck raised that quarterback from, again, the depths of a roster that won 4 games the year before. So Bobby Houck, again, great coach, maybe not great coach, but you know what you're going to get with him. It's the ceiling might slowly be starting to lower as his age goes on, and it does not seem like he's going to have the Jay Hill wake up of it is time to turn the offense over to somebody that knows modern football. It does not feel like that's coming for Montana Grizz fans. So it's a bummer if that is the case. Well, bummer for them, I guess.
Yeah, I just don't know how to talk about Bobby Houck without it being in paragraphs. Because I mean, Dallas, you brought up reasonable points, reasonable takes. Houck is still one of the most successful coaches in the history of the Big Sky Conference. The only thing he does not have is a national championship. Heading into this season, Montana made the Final 8 2 consecutive years. If Montana doesn't have the injury issue, if they're not seeded, they're in the discussion. So it's not that rough. It's just that if you're Montana, you're not fine with, hey, we're pretty good, we might get a seed. Montana wants to be on the same playing field as Montana State. And look, hey, Ron Loney in the comment section, we're going to reward you in a second. But Montana's not at the level of Montana State right now. And that is, to Grizz fans, that's unacceptable. I really hope for the conference, Montana can at least take one more developmental step, because Montana being very good is good for the Big Sky in my mind. But it's a question mark, man. It's a question mark of whether Houck can be flexible in a way that again, talk about Jason Eck and Troy Taylor. Troy Taylor, there's no way he wanted a 2 quarterback system. It's what worked. Jason Eck, he openly said when he came over to Idaho, look, he doesn't have a system. He's going to match the system to the players. That's how it works today. That's how people are successful outside of football too. Yeah, Bobby Houck is the opposite. Bobby Houck is, man, I got a system and it works if you do your role. Well, we're going to see. We're going to see, because the trajectory is clearly up after Bob Stitt, but there's some stuff that he's just not doing. And until he does it, Montana's honestly might be in the same discussion that Eastern was, again, the last couple of years of, for Eastern with Aaron Best had been, until this year, they were good, but a step below but what they'd been with Baldwin. And they were just settling in a new level of good, but not great. If Montana can't turn a couple things around, that's who they are. And I guess if Montana is not the University of Montana, let's say they're Weber State, the tone of the discussion is, it's probably not this fatalistic, but Montana builds himself out as something different than the rest of the conference. And if they're going to try to keep doing that, their fan base wants to keep doing that, something's got to change. Or, well, I mean, honestly, if something doesn't change, I bet their fan base is going to force something to change. But let's reward Ron Loney in the comment section. Jump to Montana State. Dallas, you've been on the shelf. I think there's only one grade even fret over with Montana State.
I mean, Montana State is a tough one, to be completely honest, to grade them, because I look at it as, are you looking at their grade before the bracket came out or the grade after the bracket came out? Because if you think about their season before the bracket came out, you can't give this anything other than an A. I mean, you could say it's not an A+ because they lost to an FBS school that was occasionally ranked this year, and no shame in that. But then Montana State may or may not have gotten jobbed with their seeding, and what was looking like, hey, there's maybe a nice pathway here to go back-to-back national championship games. That road got a whole lot harder when you got the 4 seed instead of thinking, hey, hopefully we got the 3. Even just that one change, that is a kick in the nuts. I'm going to go with an A because I'm afraid of what Ron is going to tell me if I don't give them an A. But I do think there are a handful of Bobcat fans that are not particularly thrilled about how their seed lined up.
You mean every Bobcat fan is not thrilled about how their seed lined up? And honestly, it's not just the number being the 4 seed instead of the 3 seed. It's that Montana State is probably going to draw Weber State in the second round of the playoffs, their first round, which, I mean, honestly, like Idaho, I think if Idaho wins, Idaho has a better week 2 matchup than Montana State. It'll be on the road. But my actual grade on the season, dude, there's nothing but an A for Montana State. Yeah, Bobcats are undefeated in FCS play. Only losses to Oregon State, who's a solid Pac-12 team. The Bobcats also navigated injuries this year in a way that was pretty dang impressive. I mean, look, for a stretch earlier in the year, Montana State was down to like their 4th or 5th string running back. Tommy Mellott, quarterback, went down with injury. Then Sean Chambers, who looks like Sean Chambers is a Wyoming transfer. Tommy Mellott is a homegrown Montana dude. Sean Chambers is very similar to Tommy Mellott. Honestly, I think Sean Chambers is a little bit better than Tommy Mellott, but just with the makeup of the team, Mellott's going to continue to be the starting quarterback. Chambers was leading the Big Sky in rushing touchdowns even after having to sit out like 3 or 4 games for injury. Let's look at the Big Sky season touchdown leaders. Yeah, Sean Chambers missed a couple games in Big Sky play and still rushed for 10 touchdowns. Dude's incredible. Brent Vegan looks like a kick-ass hire as a coach, which maybe Vegan is a great example for the state of Montana to remember, take a Xanax after the Montana State game. Because last year when Montana beat the shit out of Montana State, everything I heard was, hey, Vegan's Rob Ash 2.0. Hey, Vegan's Rob Ash 2.0. Well, first off, Rob Ash was not a bad coach. But second, it was one game. Montana State made the final that year. And this year, Montana State looked minus injuries. They looked invincible. This isn't a team that led the Big Sky in rushing on the season, but I got to stress with how impressive Montana State averaging 347 rushing yards per game in conference was when the Bobcats only threw for 180 yards at all per game. Also, like everyone knew Montana State was going to run most plays and no one could stop them at all. That was just it. That was the season. Even their close game against Weber State, the Bobcats still scored it's 43, right, Dallas? Yeah, it's 43. The closest Big Sky game Montana State played, well, 2 close games. There's Eastern early, they won 38-35. Then Weber State later, 43-38. In the close game against a strong defensive team, Montana State scored 43. That's with injury issues. Then you look at the brawl game. Vegan's team is doing exactly what you'd hope they were. They're being creative as hell with running the ball. Both Mellott and Chambers are sharing the field against Montana, which means, hey, trick plays are on the table. There's 2 guys who can pass easily well enough. Plus, they're great rushers. Vegan's taken this program a step beyond what it was with Jeff Choate. And it's really impressive to me. I personally do not like Montana State that much. Not a put down, it's just I grew up in a Grizz household, so that's where I am. But man, these dudes are good. I mean, honestly, Dallas, if Sac State and Montana State played, let's pretend the Big Sky had a conference championship game. Who would you pick?
I would have picked Montana State.
I'd pick Montana State too.
And I don't think I would have picked it particularly close. I think I would have picked Montana State to beat them by 2 touchdowns.
No, you and I learned that. Did we both pick Montana over Montana State last week?
No, I definitely picked Montana State last week.
Okay, I picked Montana. I've learned, man.
No, to just quickly filibuster, because you brought up Sean Chambers for a very small portion of time. Sean Chambers missed 2 games and still came in 3rd in total points scored in the Big Sky. He averaged 11.3 points a game. if he plays a full season, he's the runaway player of the year. Absolutely incredible in the time that he was able to play. Absolutely incredible. Montana State's for real, man.
Yeah, I don't have anything else to add. They're just an A or an A plus, and I don't care which. They're two consecutive years of being great with the new coach. They were good with Choate heading into that. This is just a program. It's a program on the rise. Man, I don't have much else to add other than I think Idaho. Look, let's talk the Idaho angle for like 2 seconds. Yeah, Idaho probably lucked out not having to play Montana State this year. That probably helped, and I'm not going to complain about that. We have to hit Weber State. That's the final playoff team. We haven't talked about Dallas. Weber State doesn't quite get a seed. The Wildcats finish. Man, I had forgive me, guys, dude. I had this shit up. Now I have to filibuster to get the record up. The Wildcats finish 9-2, 2 total losses on the year at Montana State and versus Sacramento State. 5-point loss at Montana State, 3-point loss at home against Sacramento State. That's it. Everything else was a convincing win, minus that weird NAU scare, but still, whatever. 2 losses to 2 seeded football teams. Offensively, for the first half of the season, Weber State looked like they took a step forward. It's been regressing in the second half of the year. But Weber also gets this weird setup where they're awarded the home game by the FCS playoff committee, even though they did not have the larger bid over North Dakota. So I know that is some like tacit way of trying to acknowledge Weber State. I don't know, should have been top 8 or something like that, but they're not, or they're trying to acknowledge Weber's number 9. Whatever, FCS playoff committee, just get that shit together. But great on the season, Dallas.
I mean, this one to me is the hardest grade because as much as I want to reward them for Mickey Mantle and Jay Hill finally figuring out if you hand the offense to somebody who knows what they're doing, all of a sudden you're scoring 35.8 points a game and you have a top 5 offense in the conference. That should be terrifying. Obviously, they're still one of the best defenses around, led the league in scoring defensively, but you have to be really disappointed if you're a Weber fan. I know that, again, 5-point loss to Montana State, 3-point loss to Sac State. Like, those are not bad losses by any means, and you're not sitting here thinking, like, well, if we could have just gotten that game. Northern Arizona is the rivalry game, and I know that stuff gets weird, but I look at that and think if they would have gone out there and blown NAU apart, which is very tough to do in Flagstaff. Not a whole lot of teams do that. If they don't barely sneak past that game, are they seeded? Like, I know that they got the home game, but then they run right back into Montana State. And while they're probably not as upset about that as most Montana State fans are, that feels like just a slap in the face that you could have had so much more. There was the hope and dream for getting a seed and at least making a little bit easier path for yourselves. And instead, here you get North Dakota, who is a good team. They're not, I wouldn't pick them, certainly not on a neutral field and certainly not at home for Weber. But then if you get past that game, you run right into Montana State. That sucks. Like, that absolutely sucks for a season that you might have thought you had an outside shot at doing something in the playoffs. You're going to run into Montana State. Good luck. So I'm going to give Weber State a B+ only because for all the progress they made with their offense, they just didn't get it done in the end to get what they really wanted.
I need to help justify your grade, Dallas, because I'm pretty close to there too. Weber, I want to give Weber some version of an A, but I'm going to sit on B+. And offensively, the first half of the season, especially out of conference, Weber looked a lot better. Dallas, I'm looking at conference stats. I know you don't look at conference stats, but I do, and I'm talking. So where do you think Weber State finished total offense on the season in the Big Sky? 12 teams.
It depends, because I know that they finished 5th in scoring so do you mean in yardage?
Yeah, total offense.
Total offense yardage, we're going to go with 7th.
10th.
Ooh.
Weber finished below Montana in total offense.
Ooh.
And scoring the Wildcats finished 6th, which, look, what matters more is, of course, scoring. And Weber State is a team that's famous for getting points in special teams and points from their defense. So not trying to pretend that part does not exist. But some of the offensive steps that we saw early in the season, they just weren't there at the close of the season. Weber State guys we stay close with were, again, frustrated with Weber State offense to close out the year, especially in that NAU game. And even though, again, Weber State scored 33 in that game, that's not a terrible outing. It's more that it feels like Weber should be, because we saw it earlier in the year, we feel like Weber should be able to do more. And to close the year, the Wildcats just didn't. The defensively, they're still essentially elite. That Weber had the number 2 total defense, gave up 322 yards, gave up the fewest touchdowns on the season in 19. Scoring defense, Weber's number 2 at giving up 21.9 points per game. That was also on a schedule that included, Weber State. I mean, who'd they dodge? Idaho? I think, because Weber can't play themselves. So, Weber didn't dodge Montana State, or Sacramento State. So that those defensive numbers like that are impressive, but still, it's a rebound year for the Wildcats. Not making the playoffs last year, they've reestablished themselves for sure as a very good team. But I feel like they're a step below what the Wildcats were in the last, in 2019, pre-COVID time. And weirdly, what does Weber State honestly miss Jake Constantine? I know we're 3 years out at this point, and there's 4 people in the world who even get that joke. But look, I mean, the Wildcats, there's some offensive stuff that it's frustrating that it didn't click in the second half of the season. Ron Loney in there saying their offense is regressing, because he's right. But again, to be fair, Weber had a very good season. We're Idaho fans. If Idaho had the same season Weber had, we'd be giddy. Idaho had close to the same season Weber had, but not quite. And, as Vandals, we would love to have that. Most of the Big Sky would love to have that. Hey, University of Montana wouldn't mind having a season like Weber State had. So I don't know, man. I guess B plus sounds fine to me. Ty McPherson, one of the better receivers in the league. Curious what kind of numbers that dude would put up if he was if he played somewhere else. The Wildcats for sure can run the ball, and one of the weird stories, or disappointing stories of the season for Weber, is that Josh Davis, due to injuries, just does not look like he was the same guy who was the Jerry Rice Award winner as a freshman. But hey, Dante McMillan looking fine in place, averaging 6.4 yards per carry, 5 touchdowns, 80 yards per game, which isn't to say Davis had a terrible season. It's just he's had serious injury issues, and that wears on you when that happens 3 years in a row. Anything else you want to talk about Weber State?
No, I think B plus for me, but only to me, again, it's only because of just the way that you got shafted by or maybe not shafted like Montana State got shafted, but you didn't quite get the draw you were hoping for. Just remembering back to last year when they lost to Portland State and put up only 18 points. I know that they lost close to UC Davis last year, and then they only beat them close this year. But it felt to me like a little bit had changed from last year's team. Last year's team to me felt like the end of the Weber State era. And I truly thought, and I apologize to Colby and the rest of the Weber State Weekly crew that we know, I truly thought that we were going to see either Jay Hill leave or Weber State start falling apart. It felt like Hill hadn't figured it out. The offense, I know that the offense, there were still complaints, but I would take this year's Weber State team over the 21 team in a heartbeat, and their coaching staff I thought was also improved. And if I'm Weber, I've got to be happy about that, and that's where I'm thinking B plus.
Yeah, Patty Frerks in the comments section saying Weber played damn near toughest possible conference schedule behind Eastern, which he is right. Look, Weber beat UC Davis, and Davis did not make the playoffs. We might talk about Davis. I say might because we're 45 minutes in. There's some teams we're not going to talk about that much, clearly. But Weber had a tough schedule, finished pretty damn good. So maybe I'm wrong with what my grade is, but not it's hard to talk about Weber without this. There's this 10, let's call it 11% to justify the grade. 11% underwhelming, 89%. Look, there's a lot of good stuff there. It's clearly a good team. So not trying to give them a shitty grade, but I don't know. I feel like Weber State fans themselves probably feel the same way, as in they're kind of, Weber's probably not going to make a Final Four this season or Final 8 this season.
Yeah,
which is in 2019. That was when Weber State made a Final Four. They beat Montana to get into the last four. Seemed like maybe the Wildcats had finally taken that step into like the elite, not just nationally very good, but nationally elite. Mm-hmm. And clearly that's not what happened. It was just a very good year. It was a just historically good year for Weber, a historically good year for a lot of programs that the Wildcats have not, and I'm going to say here, will not repeat this year.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think we've definitely seen that was just an anomaly, but at the same point, I feel like you've got to be pretty happy with if you came off of that season last year barely being above 500 and you were told fringe seed next season, I would feel like the Weber State guys have to be pretty happy with that.
We're going to take a hard right turn, and we're going to hit a couple of awards. Yeah, well, we're not going to explain that joke, but a couple of awards from the Big Sky Podcast Network, and then land on a discussion point. So, a Offensive Player of the Year, as voted on by Big Sky Podcast Network contributors and beat reporters, was Cameron Scadaboo, Sacramento State. Which it wasn't really close that Scadaboo got the award. I will throw an asterisk that if either Tommy Malott or Sean Chambers don't miss games for injury, I think it's a little bit more of a discussion. But like Scadaboo leads the league in rush. Well, actually, he's second in conference play in rushing yards per game at 115.1, just below Alonzo Gilliam. Rushed for 3 touchdowns. But I guess it was more that also his presence in the passing game. And maybe what's wild about Scadaboo, 7 yards per rush was a huge deal too. Asher O'Hara stole a ton of his touchdowns. That if Asher O'Hara is not on that team, Scadaboo probably rushes for about 12 touchdowns. But Scadaboo also has some of the most just physically impressive plays this season. If you saw his highlights, because man, the guy absolutely just runs over people. He's a sophomore. Is he a sophomore or COVID freshman, Dallas? No, he's a sophomore. Yeah, sophomore, because Sac didn't play COVID year. Yeah, he's a sophomore. Real good running back, dude, that anyone would want to have on their team. Yeah, Ron Lowe in the comment section. He's a physical back. Damn right he is. I have sometimes visceral reactions watching Scadaboo. He just doesn't go out of bounds. It's an old school kind of thing. He doesn't care about taking extra hits. And honestly, he's probably trying to make linebackers and corners feel like they're taking hits on the way down. Not really close. The voting. Number 2 is Hayden Hatton, wide receiver for University of Idaho, set school record with 15 touchdown receptions. Really took off in the second half of the season. Took a little bit of time to get things rolling, but hey, first year head coach, new offensive coordinator. There's going to be some things to iron out. And
don't forget, Hatton hardly played last season.
Right. Yeah, Hatton essentially sat out the entire season with injury issue. So those are the top 2. That's how I voted, Dallas. Well, anything you want to add on those 2?
I do want to shout out Alonzo Gilliam. I think if UC Davis had another win or maybe another 2 wins, I feel like he probably would have won this award. He only had 71 yards less than Scadaboo on the whole season, considerably more touchdowns than Scadaboo did, but he was also, much more of a focal point. Obviously, Scadaboo has Asher O'Hara running around next to him half the time. Gilliam is the only presence in the running game over there. I know that Lan Larson's decent, but I think Alonzo Gilliam probably would have had a little bit more of the voting if UC Davis had just done a little bit more. And they had a tough schedule. They did what they could, and they're just short in the end. But I don't see any problem with Scadaboo, Hatton as 1-2, and then you say Gilliam's the honorable mention. That's pretty spot on for what this season was.
Yeah, wild thing. Gilliam didn't get a single first or second place vote from our beat reporters or Big Sky Podcast Network contributors. I'm going to blame it. We purposely did the voting early so that I wanted to do awards before the end of the season, but then life got in the way. So here we are. Asher O'Hara rushed for 13 touchdowns for Sacramento State. So yeah, if Scadaboo is in the backfield alone, he's probably rushing for about 15 touchdowns. Real impressive. I mean, look, there's a ton of guys who had kick-ass seasons. Weirdly, just a weird development that we can talk about for like a minute, Dallas. It's virtually all skill position players. The quarterback talent in the Big Sky has shifted quite a lot over the last 3 seasons. Now, I know some teams stylistically are changing where like defenses in the Big Sky are getting better. I'm not sold on Big Sky teams needing to be able to rush as in like part of their identity. I think just the talent wave right now is that teams are getting stronger on the offensive line. A lot of schools don't have as good quarterbacks, but they do have strong running backs. Pair that with good offensive lines like, Montana State, for example. I don't think Montana State's trying to recruit quarterbacks who don't throw that well. It's just what's happening right now. But no quarterback really in the discussion whatsoever for first offensive player of the year or offensive player of the year runner-up. Defensive player of the year, this was a runaway. Patrick O'Connell for Montana. Ignore the few losses because look, Montana minus the last week of the season, they kicked ass defensively. The offense is what let Montana down this season. Patrick O'Connell was absolutely electric on the edge for a ton of this season. Dallas, you have the actual stats.
Yeah,
so I'll throw it to you.
Patrick O'Connell missed 2 games and still led the league in tackles for loss and in sacks. He tied with Cosmos Coetti at Northern Arizona with 13 tackles for loss apiece, and he had a half sack more than Sebastian Valdez at Montana State. So O'Connell with 13 and 8 there, and then in the tackles, he definitely didn't lead in tackles. Again, he missed 2 games, and you're also an edge rusher. You don't pack up as many tackles, but to play 9 of 11 games and still lead the league in tackles for loss and sacks, that is a runaway. Absolutely. He's the best player on one of the best defenses. If you don't want to say the best defense in the league, I won't hold anybody against that. I think that Montana's defensive numbers are gently artiflated or gently inflated. Oh boy, it's getting late tonight, Brian. Just gently inflated ever so much because their offense couldn't keep the ball on the field. I think that does a little bit of damage to your overall stats, but I couldn't argue O'Connell. I'm assuming O'Connell got every first place vote.
O'Connell, let's look it up. Let's go to the tally. No, he did not quite get every first place vote. Our runner-up picked up a few first place votes. Maxwell Anderson out of Weber State, who, Dallas, again, you did the work on stats. I'm going to throw it to you. Weber State is known as defensive back university. And actually, Maxwell's conference, non-conference splits are wild because conference teams figured out to just quit throwing towards him. But again, you did the actual work here on Maxwell Anderson, so you take it away.
Yeah, so keep that in mind here as I read off his numbers. Teams did stop throwing to him. They just went to the other side of the field. Maxwell Anderson in 11 games, and again, his Big Sky stats not quite as reflective of this. Across the whole season, he led the league in picks with 5. He also had 9 pass breakups, so he led the league in defense passes with 14. Dylan Wyatt from Cal Poly with 13. Marcus Harris at Idaho with 12. So, and Marcus Harris was, I think, the brightest spot on the Vandal defense this year. So you're talking about guys that were making impacts, and Maxwell Anderson put a much bigger impact out there. Very, very deserving of some first place votes. I still think O'Connell's the guy, but Maxwell Anderson not a bad number 2.
And now let's get to the transition. We already brought up the story of the year, and the season was voted on was Idaho. And Idaho, with their turnaround, the only other story receiving votes was Sacramento State continuing their run of finishing atop the league. Montana State at some point is going to be joining that like second tier discussion. We got to get to the worst story of the season. And our voting is split, and I think it really depends on how you choose to say what you think matters the most in the Big Sky. Our options are, the top 2 worst stories in the league. The Northern Colorado dumpster fire and Ed McCaffrey and his honestly worse than we even realized run of nepotism. If reports are correct that McCaffrey was letting his son Dylan sit in on coaches only meetings and no other player was allowed to, that is predictable. The other story was Eastern Washington Yeah, Dallas has the headline there, Aaron Best of the worst. Eastern Washington, how are they going to handle their rebuilding year? Yes, they had a rough schedule, but Eastern was terrible this year. Won 2 conference games, only had 1 convincing win, 3 wins on season, only 1 convincing one the entire year. Dallas, which direction do you go of which was the worst actual story for the Big Sky?
Oh, Ed McCaffrey, without question. Unless Eastern struggles again next year, Eastern has down years every once in a while, but they've gone almost 20 years without missing the playoffs back-to-back years. This happens from time to time. When Vernon Adams left and they replaced him with Jordan West, the former walk-on who had a handful of great games to start the year, and then by the end of the year, he'd been replaced by Gage Gubrud because he'd completely fallen apart. I'm going to give Aaron Best one pass just because they did also play about the worst schedule possible. To me, it is Ed McCaffrey, or excuse me, the Fire Ed McCaffrey, because that guy was one of the worst coaches we've ever seen at any level of football, much less this level. Holy piss. It is a good thing for the Big Sky that guy is out. It also means that there is at least one school that has some semblance of regularity to it and realizes if your coach is throwing your players under the bus, if your coach is treating his own family members that are on the team so much better than everybody else on the team, if he's got absolutely no results to back it up and he has zero accountability for anything he does, it's probably time to fire his ass. So props to Northern Colorado for finally pulling the trigger there. But the last 2 years there, man, the excitement that they probably thought they were going to get from let's hire this former Broncos legend to try to bring some momentum back to this program. Did they get anything worthwhile out of that? Or is this just 2 years that they completely pissed away, Brian?
For Northern Colorado, man, of course this was 2 years pissed away. I mean, this was a really in-your-face ugly story this year that, hey, I'm going to blame Tubbs at the club for trying to make sure there was some light on Northern Colorado and like the nepotism dumpster fire that was going on there. Because honestly, I don't know who else is giving much attention to the in-your-face nepotism. Us at Idaho have certainly had our experience with that. But look, Northern Colorado, honestly, Ed McCaffrey's comments, which week was that? That was after Montana State when Northern Colorado lost. Don't quote me on this, Dallas. I think it was 763-2. And
it was 58-10, but that was a very close second guess.
Yeah, sorry, 58-10. And Ed McCaffrey was asked about Dylan. And look, Ed just did make a reasonable point that, look, Dylan's not on the defensive side of the ball. But essentially, Ed McCaffrey has been going to the Zach Kloss School of Accountability during his time in Northern Colorado. It seems that every issue is the fault of someone else other than the McCaffreys. And weirdly, Ed hired his 28-year-old fail son, Max, as offensive coordinator last season. In 2021, Northern Colorado scores 12 touchdowns in Big Sky play. And of course, Max McCaffrey has his job back. Honestly, the most effective member of that family or that extended family is Max's girlfriend was the director of football operations, which is an ugly look, but hey, maybe she was the most effective. Maybe she was the best employee out of all the McCaffreys or players on scholarship there.
It's not like she could have been a whole lot worse.
Yeah. This was a black mark for the Big Sky. Northern Colorado did take a shot in the dark with a sexy hire at the time. And there was enthusiasm early on, but it was just a name. And McCaffrey had no experience outside of coaching at a high school powerhouse. He clearly never took the Big Sky seriously. And I'm glad Northern Colorado showed him the door and decided, look, it's no longer time to take him seriously. Yes, Ed McCaffrey was shit canned today. And it's a great news for the Big Sky. I honestly think Eastern is the worst story. And it's not like the worst in your face story. Because Northern Colorado, there's a visceral reaction people should have, because when people sense there's something not fair or not meritocratic about sports, it loses legitimacy. And the moment a coach loses legitimacy as the head of the program, it's done. And the cord should be cut immediately. Kudos to Northern Colorado for not letting this drag out a few years like Idaho did. But Eastern, man, I'm concerned about Eastern, Dallas. Eastern fell off a cliff this season. And yes, they had a tough schedule, but they got their asses kicked in all but that Montana State game. And Montana State, look, if Eastern played Montana State late in the season, I don't think it's going to be a 3-point game. Eastern also, I said earlier that the Eagles had a single convincing win on the season. I really mean it. The Eagles had one convincing win all year. It was the final week of the season when Eastern played a lot of backups, beating Northern Colorado 45-21. But look at their other wins. Narrowly beating a very shitty Tennessee State team 36-29. Needed a Big Sky Player of the Week effort from Gunnar Talkington to get that 7-point win. And then Cal Poly, Eastern wins 17-10. They were just bad. That was it. Eastern just completely fell off a cliff. And I'm concerned for the Eags because that program has been strong for 20 years. And they just don't have the infrastructure, I think, and they don't have the facilities, I think, to not have a real good environment and to not have positive momentum as part of their recruiting pitch. This is not a rebound year like Bill Baldwin had. Bill Baldwin had 6 and 5 seasons as rebound years. Look, even Aaron Best after the 2018 season, his rebound year was 7 and 4, and they just barely missed the playoffs. Or no, they're 6 and 5 and barely missed the playoffs, but they had a better resume than North Dakota, who made the playoffs. So look, those are there's reason to be keeping an extra eye on Eastern Washington, because I'm a little bit concerned that Eastern has the dynamic of Idaho back in the FBS, where for Idaho in the FBS, the margin for error was very slim. And if the bottom fell out, it's going to be a decade or decade and a half to even try and turn, or half a decade to turn it around. I don't think Eastern has a lot of middle ground. Like, the benefit for Eastern is there's a couple of really shitty programs right now that will give the Eagles a couple wins. But this is a huge step back, man. Eastern was on a downward trajectory anyway after that 2018 national runner-up finish. With Eric Berrier last season, and honestly, one of the best receivers in the entire nation, Lolo Talimu Jones, who, if that dude had hands, he would have been the SEC. Eastern made the second round of the playoffs. Lost a lot of guys who were super COVID seniors who just didn't leave, because, to Aaron Best's credit, he has maintained a culture that a lot of Eagles like being a part of. But look, you think Eastern is going to be picked for any sort of rebound season next year? I don't. I think they might be middle of the conference preseason next year, but unless there's some talent that Best for some reason decided to keep on the shelf all year, no, man, I think we sound the alarm.
I'm not going to sound the alarm yet, because their schedule is better next year, and I think that Kikoa Vesperis is going to change that program. Only because I've seen this happen before. I know that Bo Baldwin his most recent down season was 6 and 5, but they trotted out a senior that they had no business starting. Jordan West was a great kid. Should probably never have seen the field. Gage Grubrud probably should have played that whole year. They probably should have just stumbled through it, let him crash and burn a couple times, and see what he can do next year. And then, for them, obviously that's what happened at the end of the year. And then Grubrud came out of nowhere and was incredible. But Eastern has been known for having very good quarterback play. And in a year of very bad quarterback play across the Big Sky, where just nobody stood out, Gunnar Talkington, could you tell me what his stats are without having to look him up? Could you tell me how he did just relative to the rest of the conference?
I would put him, I would guess, like total yards, he was top 3.
I wasn't expecting you to have an answer for that so fast. He was second in the conference in touchdowns. In yards, he was 4th. So he was among the top guys, but again, in a year that quarterback play wasn't particularly phenomenal in the Big Sky, Eastern's guy is a top 3 to 5 statistical quarterback. And that's not what this program does. Now, if Kikoa Vesperis is not the guy next year, or they don't have a guy, say they don't get a transfer coming in that changes that program, then yes, sound the alarms. But their schedule is much easier next year. Just looking at it, they go to Idaho State, they go to Portland State, they have Cal Poly, they have NAU. Both of those are at home. If you think you can win all 4 of those games, if Eastern recovers at all a little bit to what they've been historically, there's 4 of the wins you need. you've got Southeastern Louisiana, who I think you'll be favored in because that's a home game. So let's say you win those 5, you got to find 2 wins on the rest of the schedule. I do think that's possible. I don't think that this is time to panic just yet. Because the other thing is, if I'm wrong and if Aaron Best completely bombs next year, I have no sourcing to back this up. I used to know people at Eastern. I don't anymore. So I promise I'm not saying this with any sort of belief or anything that's been influenced by anybody. It would not shock me to see Bo Baldwin come back to that program in 2024. And if Bo Baldwin comes back to that program in 2024, much like Bobby Houck returned to Montana, I think that Eastern at least gets back to what Montana's level is right now of consistent playoff contender, maybe not a national championship kind of place. I don't see any reason to panic just yet for Eastern.
Well, here's the reason I'm going to say to panic, which we have not yet talked about, which if Vesperis is the guy, why in God's name did he not play against some of the shittier teams like Portland State and Cal Poly? Like, if that's the case, what? Maybe I guess that'd be an Aaron Best ego thing. If like, hey, Gunnar Talkington was part of the team, we're going to reward him with the season. Okay, sure, whatever. You get to do that, but it seems like a mistake in my mind. And I think the wins and losses aren't going to be on Aaron Best's side here. Defensively, Eastern is as bad or worse than Cal Poly. That's a huge deal. That's not an Eric Berrier issue. That's not a Kiko Vesperis issue. That's a defensive talent issue. Eastern gave up 289 rushing yards per game. Definitely worst in the league. Not really close. Look, Cal Poly was terrible, like freakishly bad. On both sides, on both secondary and rushing defensive wise, but Cal Poly was so bad with their defensive talent that team looked like a D2 or maybe D3 school in the Big Sky. Yeah, Eastern was worse against the ground game. Gave up 34 touchdowns, 6.1 yards per rushes on the season. Let me shift over to conference stats to have this so I can have the actual comparison against the rest of the conference maybe a little better, because I don't think it gets better. I hate the Big Skies page so much with how it loads. But yeah, rushing defense, Eastern 294 yards per game in conference, gives up 24 touchdowns. So right at the same level of Cal Poly. That's part of why I'm concerned. It's like, if it doesn't matter how good Eastern's offense is, if they're going to purge rushing yards like that against this version of the Big Sky right now, they need to only play shitty teams. And that's about it.
And that's an entirely fair point. I guess I've never thought of Eastern as a particularly good defensive team. I've always thought of Eastern as we're going to try to score 50 points a game, and we're going to hope for one single turnover. I have, from even the Bo Baldwin years, I've always pictured Eastern that way. So I have viewed it as, if they can nail the quarterback spot next year, even if their defense is as bad as they've been, they're going to be in a shootout every single week. And that's kind of the Eastern way.
You're right. It's the Eastern way, but they're going to have to score a lot of touchdowns, man. If they're going to be flirting with competitive, if they're going to be like this against the better teams, they're going to have to. Like, maybe you're right. And that rebound where they beat the shit out of the terrible teams and then just kind of face plant against the better teams is that next step that maybe I shouldn't be as concerned about. I guess that's the overall health of the program I think of, and just the in-your-face drop-off that Eastern showed this year. We're at an hour and 8 minutes in, so let's just slam through a couple other grades. Is there any team that you really want to spend much time talking about grade-wise that's left over?
I mean, I think we've given Eastern Washington and Northern Colorado both Fs. I think that's pretty safe to say for both of those teams. It can't be anything other than an F. What about UC Davis? What is the grade you would give to UC Davis this year? That's about the one left on here that is most intriguing to me, because everybody else is a D or an F to me.
UC Davis is that to me is a tough one. Look, they're gonna lose Alonzo Gilliam for next year. Of course, they did not lose the league's leading rusher this year. Davis finishes 6-5, just outside the playoffs. Probably C+. I think C+ is fair. I mean, I think Davis, it's fair for Davis to think they got screwed by not making the playoffs when Montana did. However, Davis was a bubble team. We all know there's variability baked into sports. That's why you and I don't bitch that much about like a single bad call in a game, because there's variability in officiating. That's a fact of sports. If you get your team to just barely on the bubble, hey, sometimes it's going to work out, sometimes it's not. And for Davis, it did not work out this year. I think Davis established themselves as clearly a good team. They beat the shit out of Idaho. Like they really looked like they were a Sac State level team against Idaho. And then Davis went and competed against Sac State the next week. Davis just kind of showed that, look, they had 3 early losses at South Dakota State 24-22, versus Weber State 17-12, at Montana State 21-24. After that rough first half of the season, Davis got to build momentum with running through like the 5 shittiest teams in the league, and they ironed out a lot of their problems. And honestly, I expect if Davis and Weber played late instead of early, Davis probably wins that game. But Davis didn't win when they played.
I do want to correct you there very quickly. 41-24 was the score against Montana State. They did get blown apart by Montana State pretty good.
My bad. 41-24. Forgive me for the verbal typo there. But there were two close games against good playoff teams. They got their ass kicked against Montana State, then ran through the shittiest teams in the conference. After that, beat Idaho convincingly and had a single score loss against Sacramento State. That's a good football team. Scheduling gods maybe didn't work in their favor, but look, you don't get to manipulate your schedule to only play teams when you're playing well. Montana played teams when they were not playing well. They picked up losses. This is just what happens. So I'd say Davis, I don't know, C+. I think they established themselves. They're here. They're not elite, but they're good. You need to expect them to continue to be good.
If I was grading this impartially, I would give this season a B. Because I think they did just about what they were expected to do, but they finished a little bit stronger at the end of the year and gave themselves a shot at the playoffs. But if you look at their schedule, if you went into this schedule looking at it before the season, 6-5 is about what you would have scratched off. You'd expect them to lose to Cal, obviously FBS school. You'd expect them to lose to South Dakota State on the road. They made it very close, but it's a loss you probably could have expected at the beginning of the year. They blow out San Diego State, and then, like you said, you go through the Weber State, Montana State stretch. You blow out all of the bad teams, and then you lose a heartbreaker on the road to your opponent, to your biggest rival when you're trying to make the playoffs. Realistically, if you look at this schedule, this lined up about probably what you'd expect. You blow out all the bad teams. You hope to go 2-1 against the best teams in the conference so you can get into the playoffs. You went 1-2, but you had your rival with a shot to do it at the end. And I'd give him probably, I guess, B- probably. I couldn't be too devastated if I had flipped shoes with Idaho. Let's say as an Idaho fan, if I was handed this schedule and told this is what you were last year as UC Davis's quality in 2021, you handed this schedule, I would think 5-6 to 7-4 is the window, and you shot right in the middle of that. A couple things didn't break your way. It is what it is. You can't be super thrilled with it, but you can't also be too devastated, like you said, Brian. They're exactly what we expected them to be. They are the best, like, middle tier team in the Big Sky. They're not one of those 3 or 4 schools that's just always just ahead above everybody. But they're clearly better than the second and third tiers of the Big Sky. They're just kind of in that weird 1.5 tier right now.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that at all. I mean, the bottom of the Big Sky is not bottom. The middle of the Big Sky is much better than it was, 15 years ago, or when Montana was making its run of winning what Montana won like 12 consecutive Big Sky championships, something like that. Don't fact check me on it. It was about a decade. That's not the conference anymore, man. If this was a normal conference where every team played everyone, like, this isn't to have the realignment talk because I'm not going to have that right now. But if you cut off the most recent non-University of Idaho editions and this was a 9-team conference, all the good teams would have to play each other. And I think you would just have a slew of teams at the top that finish like 5-3. And like the conference winner would be 6-2 or something like that. But that's not where we are. Like you said, you play the schedule you get. If you can't beat the good teams, you're not a great or elite team. Davis didn't pick off enough good wins. They did get a good win against Idaho. But I mean, I think Davis not making the playoffs is fine for me. I didn't have this huge. I don't fret. Again, I don't fret over if you're slightly off by one spot or another. Like with Montana State, should Montana State have been the 3? Yeah, well, they finished as the 4. Right? Like same goddamn thing. It's just that their actual map sucks. But just looking at the number, like, yeah, who gives a shit? Like 3 or 4, same damn thing. It just means you're one of the top 4 teams in the nation in the end. Rest of the conference, I want to just breeze through real quick. So to look at standings, I gotta get standings up, man. I am just outing myself as being ready for this conference year to be over. Not because I didn't enjoy it; it's been a ride. But Tubs of the Club, we've been publishing a lot of stuff, which we not get that huge river ad. So we haven't hit Idaho State. Idaho State's obviously a dumpster fire F, right, Dallas?
I would give them a D- only because I think when Ragel went semi-viral in this, or Regal, however it's pronounced, I'm sorry, I don't care. Tough shit. Be better football. When he went off about how there was a bunch of guys that aren't going to be here next year and attitudes have to change, and he even kind of said he was tired of Pocatello already. Those are all facts. That program needs to be burned to the ground and rebuilt from maybe the studs, but realistically, you need to just raise the whole thing and start fresh. The coach is on board with that. It sounds like he understands that there's a lot of work to be done, and that the guys that are right there right now are just not going to get it done. So I can't give him an F, because at least the coach does seem to be fully aware of what he's walking into, which is not what Ed McCaffrey did at Northern Colorado. So can't give him an F for that, but I will give him a D-.
Okay. What about Northern Arizona? Finished 2-6.
That is a solid D for me. You're still early in Chris Ball's tenure. 2-6 in conference, 3-8 overall isn't good at all. It's definitely not where you want to be. But I wouldn't give it quite an F, because he didn't bottom out to the point that he's going to get fired. I would imagine. I mean, forgive me if I'm wrong here, but we are on the Monday after the season's over. I would have expected if Chris Ball was going to get fired, it would have been announced by now. Here we are at 10:21 on Monday. He's not been fired. I'm assuming that means he's getting another year, which means he didn't F his way to losing the job. He's got another year to try to show. What is this, year 5 for him coming up?
Yeah. He's finished. I was about to ask you, are we sure that a 4th season is early in his tenure?
I mean, with COVID, it's so hard to judge some of these things. And I feel like we've had this talk before, just you and I, about Beau Baldwin. Do you call this Beau Baldwin's 3rd season or 2nd season at Cal Poly? It's that same for those guys that were trying to rebuild programs. What did the COVID year do? I don't think we really know the full extent of that. So I'm fine saying Chris Ball's got one more year to figure it out. And if next year you do the same thing, you go 3-8, look, it's time for him to go. If he improves and they go 5, maybe 6 wins, maybe you see, hey, there is progress here. There was a little bit of a weird year that threw some teams off. Maybe he's building. That's the only reason I can't give him an F right now, is there's maybe a chance that things still turn around there.
NAU's made the playoffs 3 times in program history, so I'm not trying to have preposterous standards for the dude, but NAU's gone backwards. They're clearly not as far along as they were when Chris Ball first took over. Clearly, they're not better off than before they fired Jerome Sowers. So I'd go. Honestly, man, I'm going to give NAU an F. They won 2 Big Sky games, man. Their coach is in their 4th year, or fine, count it as 3rd. If Jason Eck was in his 3rd year at Idaho, Dallas, and Idaho won 2 games, tell me how you'd feel.
Is that knowing what he inherited from Paul Petrino?
Yeah.
I would be pretty pissed off about it. Now, but again, that's also because I expect so much more out of Idaho. I don't expect much out of NAU, and maybe that's where it's my expectations of the program. Maybe that's why my grade is being influenced here.
Okay. I will say your diagnosis is correct.
Like Jerome Sowers obviously had a historic-ish career. He made the playoffs 5 times with NAU, but I also don't think Jerome Sowers was going to get you much farther when he was fired in his 60s.
That's fair. Other teams we haven't touched yet. Cal Poly 1-7 in conference. They pick up a last week of the season win over top 5 Portland State. I'm going to give them an F2. There's moments where Cal Poly looks fun offensively. Losing quarterback Jaden Jones early in the season would hurt them pretty bad. Spencer Brash just turned the ball over way too much. There's clearly a reason why Jaden Jones won the starting job. Jones looks like he could be electric. That defense is miles away from being flirting with passable, but I think that injury really mattered for them. I think Cal Poly might make a mini jump next year, not into being good, but into not being like catastrophically terrible and not a guaranteed win on your schedule.
I think Cal Poly could jump into that NAU tier next year. They're going to win one game that's like surprises people, or they're going to be in a couple games that surprise people. And I think that's what Cal Poly's ceiling is. I think Cal Poly might have done like you said, if Jaden Jones is healthy the whole year, they might have been able to do that. But Spencer Brash, that was a lot of turnovers. He almost had 20 of them. That was a rough season. Got to give him an F because they looked incompetent. But again, asterisk, Jaden Jones, maybe they're a little better. Maybe next year with Jaden Jones, they are taking a step towards being at least mediocre instead of just putrid.
We're going to close by not talking about Portland State because I am so fatigued over like 3 or 4 years.
Can I give Portland State a grade?
Obviously an F.
Yeah, absolutely an F. This was if Bruce Barnum was ever going to show anything, this was the most talented team he's ever had, except for the quarterback position. And Dante Sacheret seemed pretty good. F. Good fucking enough. F. Big old F.
Yeah, maybe that's what Montana does offensively is whenever Bruce Barnum's contract runs out at Portland State, because they're not going to fire him financially, maybe he becomes the OC, and maybe that helps somehow. I don't know. Yeah, Portland State certainly had some talent, and they lost to Cal Poly to close the season out, man. That's they finished 3-5 on the year. This team should have at least been 4-4, and I know that's only one game, but like Portland State was a team we thought early in the year might be in the middle of the conference. They weren't. They were maybe the best of the shittiest teams because they finished above NAU. They beat Eastern. They beat NAU as well. So maybe that's who they are. But relative to these seniors who came back for this team, Dallas, yeah, you're right. I'm just kind of fatigued with Portland State overall. The Big Sky media landscape has forever thought that Portland State is going to be a player. Every year we hear they've got new recruits. Every year they're going to be interesting. No, dude, they just like Bruce Barnum. That's it. They just like Bruce Barnum. That's fine. You can like the dude. The team's terrible.
They did lose Anthony Adams very early on in their season. So to be fair,
but dude, every team loses guys. Like, look, Montana's all pissed because of how their season went. They lost their quarterback for two of the most important games of the season. Look, Idaho was without their starting quarterback to close the season out as well against Idaho State sucks. But look, people go down. Idaho was without Therese Traynor, who would have been the number one wide receiver on the team heading into the year. They were without him essentially the whole year. Every team is going to have important guys go down. That's just a fact of football. And that's where we're at. I'm just going to close this out, man. The coaching hot seat, we would have talked about Ed McCaffrey, but his ass got shit canned already. So great news. Dallas, real quick, who's got the hottest seat heading into this year?
Aaron Best. It's Aaron Best. If they do that again, if they do that season again, he's absolutely gone. Especially if there is the smallest chance for Eastern to bring back Bo Baldwin, whose family loved it in Cheney. Obviously, he had a great time there. I would think if you talked to him one-on-one, he'd probably say his career hasn't quite gone as he'd wanted it to when he left Eastern. That is the hottest seat to me because I think that it is a rumor. Even if I'm the one starting that rumor, I feel like that is a rumor that is only going to start heating up if Cal Poly sucks again next year and if Eastern sucks.
Yeah, our voters have Bruce Barnum as the clear number 2 with the hot seat, but I don't 100% accept that. I just don't think Portland State's going to pay to fire a coach. I was honestly shocked Northern Colorado was willing to pay to fire a coach. So the hot seat, I'm going to say I want to say Chris Ball because Chris Ball should be for sure But I think in Montana, because Montana will shit can a coach on a winning season. I think Bobby Hauck has to show that this year is about injuries. I think if Bobby Hauck doesn't show that this year is about injuries, they're looking real hard at. They're looking around the conference, seeing Idaho gets Jason Eck, Montana State gets Brent Vegan, Sacramento State gets Troy Taylor. Yes, Bobby Hauck is still a good coach overall, but if the program is around Bob Stitt level, well, Bob Stitt got fired for 7-4. If Montana does this again, I don't know if Hauck comes back, because certainly Montana has the pocketbook. Chris Ball, to me, on merit, should be the guy you're looking at. But with firing a coach, it's not just merit; it's what the actual scenario is. And I think Bobby Hauck needs to either make some changes or just be right that it was key injuries at the wrong time, and that's it. Dude, this show is brought to you guys by Hughes River Expedition. Not going to go through the whole ad read because Dallas needs to get off this call right now. Hughes River Expeditions, run by Colin Scott Hughes, kick-ass Vandal Big Sky family. They do river expeditions in both Idaho and Montana. If you are looking for something like a family trip or you want a corporate type of trip, Hughes River Expedition, they are the single best place to possibly get hooked up with for any sort of river guiding. And also, you want to go on river guide with a dude who will talk Big Sky, that's Colin Hughes. So look, if you're interested, which you should be, look, all you have to do is bring your clothes. HRA is going to handle the rest. So grab a paddle, catch dinner, ride the bull all throughout the Gem State. Call them now at 800-262-1882 or check them out at hughesriver.com. Thanks, you guys, for joining us this season. I am now going to faceplant through closing this episode out with our litany of outro videos, and I am going to just start clicking. Here we go. Jesus Christ. Motherfucker.